So AVMs, this is something that I think most folks are relatively familiar with, but breaking it down into the components can be helpful for understanding kind of where we need to focus our attention, what we need to do, and how to get the results we're really looking for. So obviously, we've got the three components that most are familiar with: the nidus, which is sort of this core of dysplastic vessels. This is what we've got sort of in green, the very loopy, irregular kind of vessels that we see here. You've got the arterial feeders, and these can come in different sizes, different shapes, different configurations, but you're going to always have some feeders coming in and then some veins coming out, which are often also quite large. As you guys are aware, arteries are usually high flow, thick walled, and veins are usually thin walled and low flow. So when you have high pressure into a thin wall, things tend to dilate. And we'll often get very, very large vessels as a result of that. And that can actually go to the extent of forming venous varices or kind of venous aneurysms that can be problematic. Now, one of the characteristics of these AVMs, which is going to become particularly important when we think about either irradiating them, gluing them, or cutting them out, is that usually there is no functional intervening neuronal tissue. If you do, DTI or other kinds of tractography, functional type of imaging, you'll often find that important structures that you would expect in a given location, say precentral sulcus, precentral gyrus, you expect that an AVM there is going to be right smack dab in the motor. Well, you may find that motors move forward or backwards in relation to it. These are often very long-standing structures that are going to co-develop with the child, the patient, over time. And so there can often be some displacement of structures. So what we might think has high eloquence may in fact not be. There can often be some intervening glial kind of gliosis, scarring of the tissue that can also come into play here. Okay. So this is sort of a cartoon schematic of those various things. And let's start on the arterial side. So there are a couple of different kinds of pedicles that you might have going in. Number one, you can have an artery that plugs directly into the nidus. That's this end-on pedicle. Those are easy. Those are essentially not feeding any normal brain. You can do whatever you want with them. It's not going to matter because there's little consequence of neural compromise. The real challenge with AVMs comes when you have these en passant pedicles. The idea here is that you've got a vessel that's going by and giving out feeders to the AVM, but then it continues on to normal tissue. So that's the kind of vessel where if you just take the big trunk, you're going to give them a stroke that's going to have consequence and not just sort of cure the AVM, right? So those are the two main kinds of pedicles we have. You have these dysplastic vessels in the middle, the nidus, those irregularly shaped and formed things, and then you've got the draining veins. And the more we understand about AVMs, the more we come to think of these as sort of like the alveoli in the lung, right? So you actually have these little clusters. You've got secondary and tertiary draining veins that are arranged sort of with substructure. The reason that can be important is because you don't have just this cluster of amorphous nidus that drains into everything. You can actually have this chunk of nidus draining into one set of veins, this chunk of nidus draining into other veins. And that's going to become important when we think about ways of killing off the nidus and ultimately curing the vessel. Now, as I'm sure you guys are aware, grading systems are a big part of neurosurgery. We like to be able to put numbers and schemes together so that, number one, we can communicate one to another, but then there are also sort of the correlates in terms of what was the grading scheme developed to convey. In this case, the Spezzo-Martin is the one that most folks use. And this was developed and published in the mid-'80s around the idea of surgical mortality and morbidity, right? So this is the scale, size, eloquence, and venous drainage that most folks know. The supplement to that was published by Lawton and the late Bill Young out of the UCSF group that added some, I think, nuance to surgical grading of these scales that took into account sort of not just the the deep venous drainage eloquence and age that, or the size, deep venous drainage and eloquence of the original Spencer Martin, but now we bring into account the age, and you get additional points for higher risk things that you might expect. The older you are, the higher the risk is. The ruptured presentation, you might say, well, how does rupture actually play into risk? And it's a little bit counterintuitive, but if you're ruptured, that's actually a good thing because you've created space and you potentially have some areas of the nidus that are sort of pre-dissected. So a rupture is actually a good thing. So a rupture is a good thing. Unruptured is bad. You get a point for being unruptured. And then diffuse this idea of, do you have any intervening functional neuronal tissue in and amongst the nidal vessels? If you can kind of draw a circle around the nidus, that's considered compact. That's good. Diffuse is not necessarily good.
Hey everyone, Ryan Rad here from neurosurgerytraining.org. If you like that video, subscribe and donate to keep our content available for medical students across the world.